Just before attending the lavish anniversary dinner of my sister-in-law, I secretly swapped the only credit card hidden inside my clutch and kept my mouth completely shut. When the outrageous $300,000 bill finally came, my husband confidently reached inside my bag and discovered my brutal trap. My name is Zaria, and at 34 years old, I am a forensic auditor who built my wealth from the ground up. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a family member who tried to use you. You will want to hear how I destroyed their scheme. The chandeliers of the Oak Creek Country Club cast a golden glow over the 50 guests seated at the long banquet table. It was the annual charity auction and anniversary dinner for my sister-in-law, Chloe, and her husband. Chloe was a woman born into generational wealth who never missed an opportunity to remind me of my humble beginnings on the south side of Chicago. She stood at the head of the table, tapping her crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. The low murmur of the wealthy elite faded into silence. "Thank you all for coming," Chloe began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "As you know, our charity fund has hit a bit of a deficit this year. We were worried about how we would cover the costs for the new community center. But we are incredibly blessed tonight. My wonderful brother-in-law Julian and his lovely wife Zaria have decided to generously donate $300,000 to cover the entire deficit." The room erupted into thundering applause. 50 faces turned toward me, beaming with wealthy approval. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on my lap. I did not blink. I did not smile. I just looked at Julian. My husband of 4 years puffed out his chest, adjusting his expensive tailored suit. He looked absolutely thrilled to finally be recognized as a heavy hitter among the elite social circle of his brother. He leaned over and kissed my cheek, playing the role of the generous, affluent husband to perfection. The country club manager walked over to our seats, holding a silver tray with a portable payment terminal resting on top. Julian smiled magnanimously at the manager. "Allow me," he said. Without even asking for my permission, Julian reached directly into my designer clutch, resting on the table. He knew exactly what he was looking for. Earlier that morning, I had watched from the hallway as he sneaked into my dressing room and slipped a sleek black card into the side pocket of my purse. He thought he was being clever, planting a card that would process a $300,000 charge without me noticing until the bank statement arrived. He pulled the heavy metal card from my clutch and dropped it onto the silver tray with a smug, satisfying clink. "Go ahead and run it for the full $300,000, Julian instructed loudly, making sure the surrounding guests could hear his casual tone. The manager nodded and inserted the card into the machine. The table was silent, waiting for the approval beep. Instead, the machine let out a sharp, angry buzz. The manager frowned and stared at the screen. He pulled the card out, wiped it on his jacket, and inserted it again. Another loud buzz echoed through the quiet dining room. "I am so sorry, sir," the manager whispered, leaning down so only our section of the table could hear. "The transaction has been declined. The screen says the account is frozen for suspected fraud." The confident smile of my husband vanished instantly. His face flushed a deep, embarrassing shade of red as whispers broke out among the guests sitting closest to us. "That is impossible," Julian hissed, snatching the card back from the manager. "Run it again. My wife has plenty of funds to cover this. It must be a bank error." He glared at me silently, begging me to fix the situation and save his precious reputation. Chloe gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in mock horror. "Oh my goodness, Zaria," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "If your accounting firm is struggling financially, you should have just told us. You do not have to pretend to be wealthy for our sake." I slowly picked up my glass of sparkling water, taking a calm, measured sip. I set the glass down and looked directly into the panicked eyes of my husband. "That is not my card, Julian," I said softly, but clearly. "Turn it over and read the name on the back." He froze, completely in terror. Julian slowly turned the heavy metal card over in his trembling hands. The color completely drained from his face as his eyes locked onto the engraved letters on the back. It did not say my name. It said Luminous Holdings, which was the exact name of the secret shell company he and Chloe had registered together just 3 months ago. His hands shook so badly that he almost dropped the card onto the table. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute panic and utter confusion. He could not comprehend how I had found the card, let alone how I had managed to slip it into my own purse for him to pull out. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The silence at the table was thick and heavy. Everyone was staring at us, waiting for the wealthy husband to resolve the embarrassing glitch. Seeing her brother-in-law struggling, Chloe immediately sensed an opportunity to play the gracious savior while simultaneously tearing me down. She stood up from the head of the table and walked over to our side, smoothing down her expensive silk dress. She placed a manicured hand on my shoulder, squeezing it just a little too tight. "Oh, Zaria, sweetheart," she cooed, her voice loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. "Is everything okay with your little accounting firm? I know the economy has been so tough on small businesses lately, especially for people from your neighborhood. You should have told us you were struggling. We are family after all. There is no shame in admitting you cannot afford this lifestyle." The condescension dripped from every word. Several of the older country club members nodded in sympathy, completely buying into her performance. Chloe looked around the room, playing the perfect concerned hostess. "Listen," she continued, looking down at me with absolute fake pity. "If you and Julian are having financial troubles, my foundation can absolutely float you a small loan. We would hate for you to feel left out tonight just because your business is going under. I can write a check right now to cover your portion, and you can just pay me back whenever you get back on your feet." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. She was offering to loan me money to pay for a donation that was supposed to go to her own charity. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Julian suddenly snapped out of his shocked trance. The public humiliation of being offered charity by his brother's wealthy wife was too much for his fragile ego to handle. He snatched his hand away from the table and leaned in close to my face. His jaw clenched tight. "Stop playing games, Zaria," he hissed through gritted teeth, his breath hot against my cheek. "Give the manager your real card right now. Do not embarrass me in front of these people. You are making us look like fools. Pull out your corporate account card and pay the $300,000 before Chloe makes a scene. You owe me this for making me look stupid. Just do it, Zaria. Fix this right now." His voice was a desperate, angry whisper, but in the quiet room it carried further than he intended. I looked at the furious, desperate man I had married. He was more concerned with maintaining his false image of wealth than the fact that I had just uncovered his massive financial betrayal. He actually thought he could bully me into covering his tracks. I calmly reached for my crystal champagne flute. I brought it to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the expensive vintage. The cold, bubbly liquid felt refreshing against the dry heat of the room. I set the glass back down on the table with a soft clink. I folded my hands neatly in my lap and looked up at Julian and then at Chloe, who was still standing there waiting for my submission. "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I will not be paying for this. I did not agree to this donation, and I certainly will not be funding it. If Julian wants to play the big spender tonight, he can figure out how to clear his own fraudulent accounts." A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. The wealthy guests leaned in, whispering frantically behind their hands. The facade was completely shattered. The perfect evening was ruined. Chloe stood frozen, her fake smile cracking, while Julian looked as though the floor had just fallen out from underneath him. The murmurs grew louder, filling the room with harsh judgment as the elite crowd watched the supposed golden couple publicly unravel right before their watchful eyes. We did not stay for the main course. Julian grabbed my arm with a crushing grip and pulled me out of the dining room before the manager could even clear the rejected card from the silver tray. The valet brought our car around in uncomfortable silence. Julian practically shoved me into the passenger seat of the BMW before slamming the door shut. The moment the doors locked and the engine started, the heavy silence in the car shattered. Julian slammed his hands against the steering wheel and let out a furious scream. I sat perfectly still, looking straight ahead at the dark road. I expected an apology. I expected him to beg for my forgiveness, or at least offer a pathetic excuse for why he tried to steal $300,000 from me. Instead, he turned his rage completely on me. "You are unbelievable," Julian shouted, his voice echoing in the confined space of the car. "You just could not help yourself, could you? You had to make a scene. You had to show everyone exactly where you came from. You just embarrassed me in front of the most important people in Atlanta, Zaria. Do you have any idea what you just did to my reputation?" I turned my head slowly to look at him. "My reputation?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "You tried to secretly charge a massive sum to a card you planted in my purse, and you are worried about your reputation. You are the one who tried to commit financial fraud in front of 50 witnesses." Julian swerved the car onto the highway, stepping heavily on the gas. "It was not fraud," he yelled, gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. "It was a temporary transfer. I was going to pay it back. Chloe and I had a plan to shuffle some assets around for the charity, and we just needed a bridge loan from your accounts to cover the gap. But you had to act like some ghetto trash and refuse to help your own family. You could have just used your real card and asked questions later. But no, you wanted to humiliate me. You wanted to punish Chloe because you are jealous of her." I let out a harsh laugh. "Jealous of Chloe?" I repeated, shaking my head. "Julian, you really are delusional. You and your sister-in-law set up a fake shell company called Luminous Holdings. You hid the corporate card in my bag, hoping to drain my hard-earned money into her fraudulent accounts. I am a forensic accountant, Julian. Did you honestly think I would not notice a fake credit card sitting in my own purse? Did you think I would just blindly pay a $300,000 bill without tracing the account numbers?" Julian swallowed hard, but his arrogance quickly overpowered his fear. He refused to back down. He pointed a finger at me, his face twisted in anger. "Listen to me very carefully, Zaria," he snarled. "I do not care what you think you know. Tomorrow morning, you are going to log into your business accounts and wire $300,000 directly to the charity fund. You are going to call Chloe and apologize for your outburst. You will tell everyone that your bank flagged the transaction by mistake and that the money is secure." I stared at him in absolute disbelief. "You want me to give you the money I asked? After you just tried to steal it from me, you are now demanding it." "I am demanding that you act like a supportive wife," he shouted back. "I am demanding that you fix the mess you made tonight. My brother and Chloe are the only reason we even get invited to these events. They are the only reason your little accounting firm gets any wealthy clients. You owe them, and you owe me. If you do not wire that money by 8 in the morning, I swear to you, Zaria, I will make your life a living hell. I will tell everyone in our circle that your business is bankrupt and that you are losing your mind. I will ruin you." The threats poured out of his mouth like toxic sludge. He was trying to gaslight me into believing that protecting my own money was a crime against our marriage. He actually believed his threats would scare me into submission. He thought my silence was a sign of weakness. He did not realize that I was not plotting an argument, I was building a case. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly as we pulled into the driveway of our home. Julian killed the engine and glared at me. 8 in the morning, Zaria," he threatened. "Do not test me." He slammed his car door, leaving me alone in the dark driveway. I followed him inside the house, feeling the heavy exhaustion settling into my bones. Before I could even reach down to unbuckle my heels, the sharp ringing of my cell phone pierced the quiet foyer. I pulled the phone from my clutch and looked at the glowing screen. It was Cora, my mother-in-law. Of course, Julian had already called his mommy to complain. He was 35 years old, but he still ran to her the moment he did not get his way. I answered the call. I did not even get a chance to speak before her shrill voice blasted through the speaker. "What is wrong with you, Zaria?" she screamed. "Julian just called me practically in tears. My poor son is having a panic attack because his own wife decided to humiliate him in front of the entire country club. How could you be so selfish?" I leaned against the console table in the hallway. Cora, I said, keeping my tone even. Did your son happen to mention that he tried to charge $300,000 to a fraudulent credit card he planted in my bag? Did he mention he and Chloe set up a fake shell company? Cora gasped, acting scandalized that I would dare accuse her golden boy of a crime. Do not you dare lie to me about Julian, she snapped. He was just trying to help Chloe with a temporary cash flow issue for her charity. That is what families do, Zarya. They support each other. You care more about your little business accounts than you do about your own husband. Her words were thick with venom. Cora had never liked me. She had always made it very clear that she preferred Chloe. To Cora, Chloe was the perfect addition to the family. She was white, she came from old money, and she had a last name that opened doors in the elite social circles Cora desperately wanted to join. You have always been jealous of Chloe. Cora continued, her voice dripping with condescension. You have been envious of her since the day you met her. Chloe has pedigree, Zarya. She has grace and class. She knows how to behave in polite society. You, on the other hand, still act like you are fighting for scraps on the South Side. You finally get invited to a high society event, and the first thing you do is cause a scene and embarrass my son. You should be grateful that Chloe even allows you to sit at her table. I stood frozen in the foyer, my grip tightening on the phone. The sheer audacity of this woman was staggering. She was weaponizing my background against me, using it to justify their criminal behavior. Listen to me very carefully, Zarya, Cora ordered, her voice turning cold and authoritative. I know exactly how much money you make with that accounting firm of yours. Julian told me all about the stock portfolio you have been building. You are going to liquidate those shares first thing tomorrow morning. You are going to sell whatever you need to sell and wire that $300,000 directly into the charity account Chloe set up. You want me to sell my investments to cover a fraudulent charge? I asked, my voice dangerously low. I want you to fix the mess you made. Cora fired back. Chloe is highly stressed right now. She has a delicate constitution and cannot handle this kind of public embarrassment. Her family name is on the line. She needs to feel supported right now, and you are going to provide that support. You will transfer the money to keep Chloe comfortable and to restore the reputation of my son. If you do not do this, Zarya, you will lose this entire family. We will cut you off completely. She delivered the ultimatum with absolute certainty, believing the threat of losing her toxic family would terrify me into compliance. She thought I was desperate for their validation and would gladly empty my bank accounts to be accepted. Cora, I said, my voice deadpan and icy. Thank you for making your position so clear. You have a good night. I pressed the end call button, cutting off her angry sputtering. I finally kicked off my heels, letting them drop onto the hardwood floor. I did not feel sad or rejected. I felt completely liberated. The lingering doubts I had about saving my marriage vanished in that exact moment. They had drawn the battle lines and severely underestimated their opponent. I walked upstairs, locked the door, and opened my laptop. It was time to go to work. I woke up the next morning to an empty bed. The house was completely silent. I walked downstairs to the kitchen to make my morning coffee. Sitting right in the middle of the marble kitchen island was a bright yellow sticky note. I picked it up and read the messy handwriting of my husband. It said, "Transfer the $300,000 to Chloe by noon, or you do not get your business back." I stared at the piece of paper. He really thought he had the upper hand. He thought he could hold my livelihood hostage. I threw the note into the trash can and walked back upstairs to my home office. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I navigated to the portal for my primary business checking account. I typed in my secure password and hit enter. Instead of the familiar dashboard showing my operating funds, the screen flashed a bright red error message. It said, "Access denied," and instructed me to contact customer service immediately. My account had been frozen. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct number for my dedicated business banker at the branch. A woman named Sarah answered the phone after 2 rings. "Good morning, Zarya," she said, her voice sounding tight and uncomfortable. "I was actually just about to call you. I am so sorry about the hold on your account." "Why is there a hold on my primary operating account, Sarah?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering. Your husband Julian came into the branch right when we opened this morning, she explained. He was very distressed, Zaria. He filed an emergency spousal override to freeze the assets. He submitted a sworn statement claiming that you are currently undergoing a severe mental health crisis. He told the branch manager that you were acting erratically and attempting to wire massive amounts of money to fraudulent offshore accounts. Since his name is still technically listed as a secondary contact on the marital profile, the legal department approved the temporary freeze to protect your assets from what he called a manic episode. I sat back in my leather office chair, taking a slow, deep breath. Julian had actually gone to my bank and declared me mentally unstable. He used the argument we had the night before as ammunition to convince a bank manager that I was losing my mind. He projected his own fraudulent behavior onto me. He thought that by cutting off my main supply of cash, he could starve me out. He thought I would panic and call him begging for access to my own money. He assumed I would cave and pay the ransom to Chloe just to get my business up and running again. Sarah sounded genuinely concerned on the other end of the line. Zaria, she said softly, if you need help, we can connect you with some resources. Julian seemed incredibly worried about your safety. Sarah, I said, my voice dropping to a serious professional tone. I am perfectly fine. My husband is lying to you. He is currently involved in a massive financial fraud scheme with his sister-in-law. He tried to embezzle $300,000 from my personal funds last night, and when I caught him, he retaliated by freezing this account. I need you to pull the security footage of him coming into the branch this morning and save it. I also need you to send me a copy of the exact sworn statement he signed. Sarah gasped, clearly shocked by the revelation. Oh my goodness, Zaria, she stammered. I had no idea. Our legal department just saw the spousal override form and acted on standard emergency protocol. I will get you those documents right away, but the freeze might take 48 hours to reverse through the fraud department. That is perfectly fine. Sarah, I replied. Leave the freeze on the account for now. Let him think he won. I ended the call and set my phone on the desk. Julian had made a massive miscalculation. He was a salesman who only understood surface-level banking. He had no idea how a forensic auditor actually structured her wealth. He only froze the public-facing operating account, which held barely enough to cover monthly payroll. He did not know about the private offshore holding accounts, the encrypted trust funds, or the secondary corporate entities I had established years ago. He thought he locked me out of my fortress, but he only locked the front gate while I held the master keys to the kingdom. He wanted to play dirty using my mental health as a weapon. He had just handed me the exact legal ammunition I needed to destroy him completely. I was still staring at the computer screen when my cell phone began to vibrate violently across the surface of my desk. It was not just one notification. The screen lit up with a rapid-fire succession of text messages, alerts, and missed calls. I picked up the phone and unlocked it. The home screen was flooded with notifications from the private Oak Creek Country Club Facebook group. I tapped the application and the feed immediately refreshed. Sitting right there at the top of the page with hundreds of likes and comments was a massive post written by Chloe. She had attached a black and white photograph of herself, looking appropriately mournful while holding a cup of tea. The text below the photo was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. It read, "Please join me in sending prayers and positive energy to my family today." Last night at our beautiful charity gala, my sister-in-law Zaria suffered a severe mental health breakdown in front of all our guests. It was terrifying and deeply heartbreaking to witness someone I love lose touch with reality so publicly. She wrote, Julian and I are doing everything we can to get her the psychiatric help she desperately needs. Because of this sudden medical emergency, the $300,000 donation to the Community Center Fund has been temporarily delayed. We apologize to everyone who had to witness her unfortunate outburst, and we ask for your grace during this difficult season. Please respect her privacy while she battles these very dark inner demons. It was perfectly orchestrated. Chloe was using the exact same narrative Julian had fed to the bank manager. They had coordinated their attack. Julian locked up my money and Chloe destroyed my reputation. She had masterfully shifted the blame for the missing charity funds directly onto my shoulders, while simultaneously painting herself as a compassionate victim. I scrolled down to the comments section. The replies from the elite women of Atlanta were sickening. A woman named Beatrice wrote, "I am so sorry, Chloe. I always suspected the pressure of our social circle would be too much for a girl from the South Side." Another country club wife commented, sending prayers. "It is so hard to integrate people who do not understand our customs. Julian is such a saint for putting up with her unhinged behavior. We all know how much he sacrifices." The disguised racism and blatant classism dripped from every comment. They were practically celebrating my supposed downfall. But the public humiliation was not the only goal. As I watched the screen, my text messages continued to pour in. They were from mutual acquaintances and a few peripheral clients who ran in the same social circles. The texts were poorly disguised attempts at gathering gossip under the guise of concern. One text from a woman I played tennis with read, "Zaria, honey, I just saw the post. Are you in a hospital right now? Please tell me you did not really go crazy at the dinner." Another message from a local real estate broker read, "Hey Zaria, just checking in. If your mental health is affecting your business operations, we might need to pause our contract. Let me know when you are stable. I need an accountant I can fully trust with my portfolios." That was the real objective. Chloe wanted to isolate me socially and destroy me professionally. She knew that in the world of finance, reputation was everything. If my clients believed I was mentally unstable, they would pull their accounts immediately. She was actively trying to tank my business so I would have no choice but to surrender to their demands and beg for mercy. I did not reply to a single text message. I did not write a furious comment on the Facebook post. Engaging with them would only feed their narrative. Instead, I opened a secure encrypted folder on my laptop. I systematically took high-resolution screenshots of the original post, the timestamps, the location tags, and every single defamatory comment. I backed up the text messages from my clients, proving that her false statements were already causing intentional interference with my business contracts. Chloe thought she was destroying me in the court of public opinion. She did not realize I was gathering evidence for a court of law. Libel, defamation, and tortious interference with a business are serious civil offenses. Every like and comment was another zero added to the massive lawsuit I was quietly building against her. Let them gossip all they want about my mental state. I calmly closed the application on my phone and opened my specialized forensic auditing software. It was finally time to dig deep and find out exactly where that stolen charity money was supposed to go. I booted up my encrypted secondary server. While Julian thought he had paralyzed my financial operations, he was completely unaware that my primary business account was nothing more than a decoy. As a forensic auditor handling sensitive corporate accounts, I never kept my actual wealth in a standard commercial bank. I logged into my secure offshore portal, verifying my biometric data and accessing the funds safely tucked away in encrypted trusts. The freeze Julian put on my local checking account was the equivalent of locking a screen door while I was already sitting safely inside the fortified house. I opened my dedicated tracing software and typed in the routing and account numbers for Luminous Holdings. When I first saw that heavy black metal card sitting in my purse the day before, I had immediately memorized the 16 digits embossed on the back. Memory retention is a fundamental skill in my line of work, and numbers have always made more sense to me than people. I hit enter and watched the dark screen populate with financial data. Luminous Holdings was registered in Delaware exactly 3 months ago. The registered agent was a generic post office box in Wilmington, but the primary signatory on the account was my husband, Julian. I shook my head in disbelief at his sheer stupidity. Chloe had cleverly kept her name completely off the direct banking documents. Instead, she used Julian as her naive, willing puppet. He was the authorized user and the sole guarantor, meaning he was taking all the legal risk, while she pulled the strings from the shadows. If the authorities ever looked into the account, Julian would be the only one holding the bag. I began pulling the transaction history, bypassing the basic security firewalls with ease. The money trail was a chaotic mess of wire transfers and cashier checks that screamed textbook tax fraud. Over the past 12 months, Chloe had been systematically draining funds from her supposedly noble community center charity. She was funneling the donations directly into Luminous Holdings under the guise of consulting fees, administrative costs, and fake venue rentals. But the money was not staying in the shell company. It was being immediately wired out to cover her massive personal liabilities. I cross-referenced the outgoing wire accounts, and the truth of her perfect life finally unraveled before my eyes. Chloe was living a complete lie. The generational wealth she constantly bragged about to anyone who would listen had actually dried up years ago. Her father had quietly filed for bankruptcy protection, and her own husband was drowning in terrible real estate investments. To keep up appearances at the country club and maintain her status as the queen bee, Chloe had resorted to embezzling directly from the charity. I watched the numbers align perfectly on my screen. She had spent over $200,000 on private flights, luxury shopping sprees, and high-stakes gambling debts. But Chloe had made a fatal miscalculation. I accessed the public tax records for the charity and saw that the board was scheduled for an independent annual audit at the end of the month. The ledger was missing exactly $300,000. If the independent auditors saw that massive hole in the accounts, they would immediately report Chloe to the Internal Revenue Service for federal tax evasion and wire fraud. She needed to replace the stolen money immediately to balance the books before the audit took place. That is exactly why she turned to Julian. She convinced my desperate status-obsessed husband that they were simply moving assets around for a clever tax write-off. She manipulated him into trying to steal my hard-earned money to cover her criminal tracks. If Julian had succeeded in charging my card last night, the $300,000 would have washed through Luminous Holdings and landed right back in the charity account. Chloe would have saved her reputation, avoided federal prison, and Julian would have played the wealthy hero. It was a perfect plan, all funded by the woman they both considered inferior and unworthy of their respect. I leaned back in my leather office chair, watching the cursor blink on the damning spreadsheet. They were not just toxic family members playing petty social games. They were federal criminals. And Julian was so blinded by his desperate desire to fit into the elite white social circle that he willingly signed his own name on the fraudulent accounts, making himself the perfect fall guy. I pressed print and listened to the steady hum of the printer churning out pages of undeniable evidence. I did not need to scream or cry or argue with them. I just needed to let them keep digging their own graves. The steady hum of the printer stopped, leaving my home office in complete silence. I gathered the warm sheets of paper and placed them inside a heavy-duty fireproof safe hidden behind my bookshelf. Just as I clicked the dial into place, I heard the familiar sound of the garage door opening downstairs. Julian was home. I quickly closed out of my encrypted offshore accounts and pulled up a blank spreadsheet on my monitor to make it look like I was struggling to work. I heard his footsteps coming up the hardwood stairs. The heavy, angry stomps from the night before were completely gone. Instead, his steps were slow and measured. The door to my office opened and Julian stepped inside, holding a large bouquet of expensive white lilies and a white paper bag from my favorite Italian restaurant. He looked exhausted, but his face was set into an expression of deep sorrow and regret. It was a performance worthy of a daytime soap opera. "Zaria," he said, his voice soft and trembling slightly. "I am so incredibly sorry." I did not say a word. I just sat at my desk and watched him walk further into the room. He set the flowers and the food down on a side table and ran a hand over his face, looking down at the floor as if he was too ashamed to meet my eyes. "I lost my mind last night." Julian continued, taking a step closer to my desk. "I was under so much pressure from my brother and Chloe, and I took it all out on you. Freezing your bank account was a terrible mistake. I was just angry and scared, and I wanted you to listen to me. I know I handled everything wrong. I know I hurt you, and I want to fix this. I want us to be a team again." His apology sounded rehearsed, like he had practiced the exact cadence and tone in his car before walking inside. If I had not spent the last 4 hours tracking his federal wire fraud, I might have almost believed him. He walked up to my desk and placed both of his hands on the mahogany surface, leaning in close. "But we have a real problem, Zarya," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Chloe is furious. The charity board is breathing down her neck about the missing funds, and she is blaming us for the delay. She is threatening to file a lawsuit against your accounting firm for breach of verbal contract. You saw what she posted online. She can destroy your business by the end of the week if she wants to. You know how powerful her family is in this city." I kept my face perfectly neutral. "And how exactly do you propose we stop her, Julian?" I asked. He sighed heavily and reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and placed it on my desk right in front of me. He tapped the top of the envelope with his index finger. "I spent all morning negotiating with Chloe and her legal team," he explained, trying to sound like a heroic husband protecting his wife. "They agreed to drop the whole thing. Chloe will delete the Facebook post immediately. She will even put out a new statement saying you had a minor reaction to some medication and that you are completely fine. I will go to the bank tomorrow morning and lift the freeze on your business accounts. Everything goes back to normal." I looked down at the envelope. "And what does Chloe want in return?" I asked. Julian swallowed hard, trying to maintain his confident facade. "She just needs temporary collateral," he said quickly. "Just to prove to her board that the funds are secured until you can properly liquidate your stocks." Her lawyers drafted a simple contract. "It just transfers the deed of this house into her charity trust fund." I slowly reached out and opened the envelope. Inside was a legally binding property transfer contract, transferring the complete ownership of my $1 million home directly into the control of Luminous Holdings. They were not just trying to steal $300,000 anymore. Because I refused to pay the cash, they were now coming for my biggest physical asset. They intended to sell my house to cover Chloe and her massive gambling debts. Every line of the document was designed to strip me of my rights and leave me completely destitute. Julian watched my face carefully, looking for any sign of panic. "It is just a formality, Zarya," he insisted. "Once you wire the cash, we will transfer the deed right back to you, I promise. Just sign the papers tonight, and this whole nightmare goes away." I looked at the contract and then up at the pathetic man standing in front of me. He was willing to render his own wife homeless just to protect his wealthy sister-in-law. "I need to meet with her," I said quietly, sliding the contract back into the envelope. "Set up a meeting with Chloe and her lawyers tomorrow. I want to look her in the eye before I sign away my house." Julian exhaled a massive sigh of relief, a triumphant smile breaking through his fake sorrow. "I will set it up," he said eagerly. "Thank you, Zarya. You are doing the right thing." He turned and walked out of the office, leaving the flowers behind. I looked at the white lilies and smiled. He was right. I was absolutely doing the right thing. The next afternoon, the Atlanta sun beat down on the patio of the exclusive Buckhead Cafe where Julian had arranged the meeting. I walked through the iron gates wearing a tailored navy suit that projected absolute authority. I spotted them immediately. Julian and Chloe were seated at a shaded corner table, sipping sparkling water and looking incredibly pleased with themselves. Chloe wore a pristine white tennis outfit, looking like she had just stepped off the court at the country club. She exuded the kind of relaxed confidence that only came from a lifetime of never facing real consequences. Julian sat beside her, looking like a loyal lapdog, eager to please his master. I sat down directly across from them without bothering to order a drink. Julian quickly slid the manila envelope across the marble table toward me. He tapped his expensive watch, trying to look important. "Let us make this quick, Zarya," he said nervously. "Chloe has a charity board meeting to prepare for, and we just need your signature to finalize the temporary collateral." Chloe smiled a thin, predatory smile. She leaned forward, steepling her fingers together. "Zarya, darling," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I really hate that it had to come to this. I know you are very attached to that house, but you have to understand the position you put us in. My charity is bleeding because of your little outburst, and my board of directors requires immediate financial reassurance. I looked at the envelope but did not reach for it. You mean the board of Luminous Holdings? I asked calmly. Or do you mean the actual community center charity that is currently missing $300,000 right before an independent audit? The smug smile vanished from her face. Genuine panic flashed in her pale blue eyes. She glanced at Julian, who suddenly looked sick. Chloe recovered quickly, falling back on her immense privilege. She let out a patronizing laugh. "Honey," she said, dropping the sweet act entirely. "I do not know what kind of paranoid delusions you have been cooking up in that head of yours, but you need to stop. You think you can throw around accounting terms and scare me. My family built this city. My father plays golf with the district judges every single Sunday. We own the politicians, we fund the campaigns, and we control the narrative." She leaned even closer until I could smell her expensive floral perfume. "You are just a girl from the South Side who got lucky," she sneered. "You married into a respectable family, and you started a cute little numbers business. But do not ever forget your place. If you do not sign that paper right now, I will bury your accounting firm in so much endless litigation that you will be bankrupt before Christmas. We will drag your name through the mud until no reputable business in Atlanta will even let you clean their floors." Julian nodded eagerly, ignoring the racist undertones. He was fine watching his white sister-in-law degrade his black wife to keep her favor. "Sign the contract, Zaria," he demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Do not be stupid. You cannot win against her family. They have too much money and too much power." I observed the pathetic pair. They were terrified because they knew I had figured out their scheme, but they were too arrogant to realize the trap they were walking into. Chloe genuinely believed that her white privilege and her generational connections made her untouchable. She thought the rules did not apply to her. She thought she could steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from a charity and simply bully a black woman into covering her tracks. I picked up the manila envelope and slowly traced my finger along the sealed edge. Chloe let out a long, satisfied sigh, leaning back into her chair. "Good girl," she said, picking up her glass of sparkling water. "I knew you would finally see reason. Just sign it, and we can put all this ugly business behind us." I looked at the envelope one last time and then threw it back across the marble table. It slid off the edge and landed on the stone patio directly at the feet of my husband. "I will not sign anything," I said, my voice steady and cold. "If you want my house, Chloe, you are going to have to steal it the hard way." I stood up quickly without waiting for their response. Chloe gasped, dropping her glass. It shattered against the table, spilling water everywhere. Julian leaped up from his chair, his face purple with rage. "You are making a massive mistake," he shouted after me as I turned and walked away. I did not even look back. I walked to my car with my head held high, feeling the warm afternoon breeze against my face. For the first time since that disastrous anniversary dinner, I felt completely in control. I had looked my abusers directly in the eye and refused to play their twisted game. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, letting the radio play softly as I merged onto the busy Atlanta highway. I knew Julian would not just let this go. He was too weak and too desperate to accept defeat gracefully. I expected him to throw a tantrum at home or perhaps try to freeze another one of my minor credit cards. But I severely underestimated just how cruel and cowardly my husband could actually be. I was halfway home when my cell phone rang through the car audio system. The caller identification on the dashboard screen showed the number for the dialysis clinic where my elderly mother received her weekly treatments. My stomach tightened. My mother had been battling severe kidney failure for the past 2 years. Her survival depended entirely on those specialized treatments. I tapped the screen to answer the call, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Hello, Zaria," said a familiar voice. It was Brenda, the head billing coordinator at the clinic. "I am so sorry to bother you on a Tuesday afternoon, but we have a rather urgent administrative issue. Your mother just checked in for her scheduled session, But when we ran her insurance profile through the system, the portal showed that her coverage was terminated effective immediately. I pulled the car over onto the shoulder of the highway and put the vehicle in park. Terminated, I asked, my voice suddenly tight. Brenda, there must be a clerical error. The premiums for that policy are paid in full 6 months in advance. I thought the exact same thing, Brenda replied, sounding incredibly sympathetic. But the system is showing a direct manual cancellation. Because the policy is technically a family group plan sponsored through the corporate account of your husband, only the primary policyholder has the authorization to terminate coverage. The log shows that Julian called the insurance provider exactly 20 minutes ago and officially revoked the dependent coverage for your mother. We cannot proceed with the life-saving treatment until we secure a new method of payment. A cold, paralyzing silence filled the inside of my car. 20 minutes ago. Julian had made that phone call the moment I walked away from the cafe table. He knew exactly what my mother meant to me. He knew how fragile her health was and how much those treatments cost out of pocket, because I refused to hand over my house to pay off the criminal debts of his sister-in-law. He decided to weaponize the health and safety of my sick mother. He was willing to let her suffer and potentially die just to force me into submission. Tell my mother everything is fine, I told Brenda, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. Put the entire cost of the treatment on the backup corporate card on file. I will sort out the insurance policy tomorrow. I ended the call and sat alone in the quiet car, gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached. This was the breaking point. Until this exact moment, I had viewed Julian as a pathetic, foolish man who was simply desperate for the validation of his wealthy white relatives. I had planned to divorce him, protect my assets, and walk away cleanly. I wanted to handle the situation like a professional accountant, but canceling the life-preserving medical care of an elderly woman was an act of pure evil. It was not just business anymore, it was personal. Julian and Chloe had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had mistaken my professional restraint for personal weakness. They thought they could hit me where it hurt the most and watch me crumble. I put the car back into drive and pulled smoothly onto the busy highway. I did not drive home to pack my bags or cry. Instead, I drove straight to my secure private office downtown. The time for playing defense was officially over. I was no longer interested in simply protecting my wealth or saving my reputation in their toxic social circle. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire lives, piece by piece. I was going to expose their federal fraud, burn down their fake high society facade, and ensure that they both faced the absolute maximum penalty under the law. They wanted to see the angry girl from the South Side. I was finally going to show them exactly who she was. I was going to completely annihilate them both. I arrived at my downtown office and locked the heavy glass door behind me. I turned off my personal cell phone and placed it inside my desk drawer. For the next 48 hours, I was going completely off the grid. Silence was the most effective weapon I had right now. If I argued, Julian and Chloe would know I was planning something. By disappearing into absolute silence, I was giving them the exact illusion of victory they desperately craved. I knew Julian would assume I was crying in a hotel room, somewhere defeated by his cruel maneuver. Let him think he had broken me while I prepared their absolute destruction. I booted up my high-capacity servers and initiated a deep dive, forensic extraction. As a licensed auditor, I had access to specialized financial tracing databases. I started with the digital footprints. Julian was incredibly sloppy. He had logged into the Luminous Holdings bank portal multiple times using our home wireless network. He had also logged in using the guest network at the country club and the private network at the mansion belonging to Chloe. I legally extracted the timestamps linking every single login directly to the physical locations of my husband and my sister-in-law. There was no way they could claim someone else had hacked the accounts. The data proved they were the ones physically executing the fraudulent transfers. Next, I targeted the wire transfer logs. I traced the money flowing out of the community center charity fund. Chloe was the charity treasurer, giving her the authority to authorize payments, but she needed a secondary signature for any transfer over $50,000. I pulled the digital images of the cleared checks from the master federal banking database. I magnified the signatures on my high-resolution monitor. The primary signature belonged to Chloe. The secondary signature supposedly belonged to the elderly charity president. I ran the images through a handwriting analysis software program that I frequently used for corporate fraud cases. The digital pressure points and stroke patterns did not match the verified signature of the president. Chloe had clumsily forged the second signature on every single check that drained the account. The evidence was piling up into a massive mountain of federal crimes. I printed the wire transfer logs showing exactly how the stolen funds were routed from Luminous Holdings into private offshore accounts to pay off the massive gambling markers of Chloe in Las Vegas and Macau. There was no charitable donation. There was no temporary bridge loan. It was pure corporate embezzlement. Every document I pulled, every address I verified, and every forged signature was another nail in their coffin. I worked straight through the first night, fueled by black coffee and cold rage. By the time the sun came up on the second day, I had compiled a master file that was over 200 pages thick. It was a masterpiece of financial destruction. The entire scheme was laid out with undeniable proof linking Chloe as the primary mastermind and Julian as the willing active accomplice. If I handed this file to the authorities today, they would both be arrested before dinner. But a simple, quiet arrest was not good enough. If I went straight to the police, Chloe would use her family connections to post bail immediately. She would hire expensive defense attorneys to drag the process out for years, claiming it was all a simple accounting error. I could not give her the chance to spin the narrative or control the public damage I needed to publicly trap her in a room full of the exact elite people she was stealing from. I needed the powerful board of directors to see the raw evidence with their own eyes before she could invent another desperate lie. I finally pulled my cell phone out of the desk drawer and turned it back on. The screen immediately lit up with dozens of missed calls and text messages from Julian. His texts had transitioned from angry demands to smug, patronizing orders. He told me to stop throwing a childish tantrum and sign the paperwork so we could put this ugly business behind us. He told me that my mother was fine and that I was overreacting to the insurance issue. He believed his cruel tactic had worked. He thought I was hiding because I had surrendered to his authority. I read his pathetic messages and felt nothing. I created 3 encrypted digital backups of the master file and saved them onto separate secure external hard drives. I printed a final pristine hard copy and placed the thick stack of papers inside a sleek black leather briefcase. Everything was ready. The arsenal was fully assembled. The trap was set and the bait was waiting. I stared at the black leather briefcase sitting on my desk and took a deep breath. It was time to cast the line. I picked up my cell phone from the table and slowly opened the text message thread I shared with Julian. My thumb hovered over the digital keyboard. I needed to craft a message so utterly pathetic and defeated that his massive ego would swallow it whole without a single second of hesitation. I typed slowly, making sure not to sound too eager. I wrote, "You win, Julian. I cannot fight you and Chloe anymore. My mother needs her health insurance and I cannot afford to lose my business. Bring the property transfer contract to the country club tomorrow morning during the charity board meeting. I will sign the deed over so the foundation of Chloe gets the assets directly and we can finally be done with this." I hit send and tossed the phone onto the desk. I did not have to wait long. Less than 30 seconds later, the screen lit up with an incoming call from Julian. He had swallowed the bait completely. I slowly cleared my dry throat, making absolutely sure my voice sounded extremely small, fragile, and totally exhausted. I pressed the green accept button and lifted the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said softly. A loud, victorious laugh erupted from the speaker. It was the sound of a weak man who mistakenly believed he had conquered a strong woman. "I told you, Zarya," he said, his voice dripping with unbearable arrogance. "I told you that you could not win against us. You finally realized that you are out of your league. Chloe was right about you. You just needed to be put in your place to remember how this family operates." I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk, fighting the urge to hang up. "You are right, Julian," I replied, forcing the words through my teeth. "I should have just listened to you from the start. Just please turn the health insurance back on for my mother. I will do whatever you and Chloe want tomorrow morning. I just want this terrible nightmare to be over." Julian sighed a heavy, dramatic sigh, acting like a merciful king sparing a pathetic peasant. "I will call the insurance company after you sign the papers," he promised smugly. "But you are going to do exactly what we say, Zarya. You are going to walk into that boardroom tomorrow and apologize to Chloe in front of her entire charity committee. You are going to tell them that you had a severe mental breakdown and that signing over the house is your way of making amends for the embarrassment you caused. Do you understand me? You will not cause a scene and you will not try to negotiate. You will keep your mouth completely shut and sign the document without asking any stupid questions or making any pathetic excuses in front of my brother and my sister-in-law." I closed my eyes and smiled a cold, terrifying smile. "I understand completely, Julian," I said, my voice flat and perfectly obedient. "I will be at the country club at 10 in the morning, and I will give the board of directors exactly what they deserve." "Good," he snapped back. "Do not be late." He ended the call without another word. I dropped the phone back onto my desk and let out a long, steady breath. They were practically celebrating their massive victory right now. I could perfectly picture Chloe popping a bottle of expensive champagne in her massive living room, toasting to her own brilliance. She thought she had successfully blackmailed me into paying off her federal crimes. She thought she was untouchable because of her white skin and her old money family name. They were both completely blind to the reality of their situation. I was not walking into that boardroom to surrender my house. I was walking into that boardroom to burn their entire lives to the ground. I opened the black leather briefcase and carefully arranged the master files inside. I made sure the high-resolution photographs of the forged signatures were placed right at the top where they would make the most immediate impact. I tucked the encrypted hard drive into the side pocket. I snapped the golden locks of the briefcase shut with a sharp, satisfying click. The sound echoed in the quiet office like the chamber of a loaded gun. I turned off the lights and walked out into the cool night air. The fake surrender was complete. Tomorrow morning, they would learn the true cost of their betrayal. I drove back to my house and slept more peacefully than I had in years, ready for the final battle. I calmly prepared for the charity board meeting. I did not rush. I took my time selecting the perfect outfit for my performance. I chose a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit and a white silk blouse. It was the armor of a woman who was in complete control of her life. I pulled my hair back into a sleek professional bun and applied a bold red lipstick. I looked in the mirror, seeing no trace of the defeated woman I pretended to be last night. I picked up the heavy black leather briefcase from my desk and walked out the door. The drive there took exactly 25 minutes. I handed my keys to the valet and walked through the heavy mahogany doors of the clubhouse. The charity board of directors always held their quarterly meetings in the grand executive suite on the second floor. As I walked down the carpeted hallway, I could hear the muffled sounds of wealthy people laughing and clinking coffee cups. I pushed open the double doors and stepped into the room. A polished oak table dominated the room, surrounded by leather chairs. Large windows offered a sweeping view of the pristine green golf course outside. The room was filled with the most powerful and influential people in Atlanta. There were real estate tycoons, retired federal judges, and wealthy heiresses. And standing right at the head of the table, holding court, was Chloe. She looked absolutely radiant. She wore a pale pink sweater set and authentic pearls. She was laughing brightly while pouring coffee for the elderly board president, an intimidating billionaire named Richard Sterling. Chloe was entirely in her element, playing the role of the selfless, dedicated charity treasurer. She was soaking up the adoration and respect of the room, completely unaware that the foundation of her entire life was about to crumble. Julian was standing near the back wall, looking incredibly out of place, but trying desperately to look important. He wore a navy suit, holding a leather portfolio. When he saw me walk through the doors, a massive, arrogant smirk spread across his face. He quickly nudged Chloe and pointed in my direction. Chloe stopped pouring the coffee and turned to look at me. Her eyes sparkled with malicious triumph. She truly believed I had arrived to hand over my $1 million home just to appease her wrath. Julian immediately walked over to me, grabbing my upper arm and pulling me slightly away from the door. "You are right on time, Zaria," he whispered harshly. "I have the property transfer contract right here in my portfolio. We are going to let the board president open the meeting, and then Chloe will introduce you. You will make your apology and sign the papers right in front of everyone. Remember what we talked about last night. Do not make a scene. Just keep your head down and do what you are told." I looked at his hand gripping my arm. "Take your hand off me, Julian," I said, my voice low and devoid of emotion. He blinked in surprise but quickly dropped his hand, sneering at me. "Just get to your seat," he ordered, pointing toward an empty chair near the back of the room. I ignored his pointing finger. Instead, I walked straight past him and moved toward the front of the long oak table. Chloe watched me approach, her smile faltering just a fraction as I set my heavy black leather briefcase directly on the polished wood surface, right next to her perfect cup of coffee. I popped the latches open with a loud click echoing through the room. Several board members stopped talking and turned to look at us. "What are you doing, Zaria?" Chloe hissed, leaning closer. "You are supposed to sit at the back until I call you up. Stop trying to make yourself the center of attention." "I am the accountant for the missing funds, Chloe," I replied loudly enough for the board president to hear. "I believe that earns me a seat at the adult table today." Richard Sterling turned toward us. He set down his cup, looking at me with interest. "Is this the sister-in-law who had the unfortunate medical issue?" he asked, his voice booming across the room. "Yes, Richard," she said, forcing a bright fake smile. "This is Zaria. She is feeling much better today, and she has come to make a very generous arrangement regarding the missing $300,000. I looked directly at Richard Sterling and offered him a polite, professional nod. "I am feeling perfectly fine, Mr. Sterling," I said clearly, "and I brought a lot more than just an arrangement. I brought the absolute truth." The room suddenly fell completely silent. The meeting had officially begun. I kept my eyes locked on Richard Sterling as I moved away from my leather briefcase. Julian frantically grabbed my wrist, trying to pull me back toward the empty chair, but I yanked my arm away with such sudden force that he stumbled backward against the wall. The elite board members watched the brief physical altercation with wide eyes. I did not give them time to process the awkward moment. I stepped up to the front of the long oak table, right where the master projection system was built into the polished wood. I reached into my tailored suit jacket and pulled out my digital tablet, along with a sleek black connector cable. Chloe realized instantly that I was not holding a manila envelope containing the deed to my house. The triumphant glow completely vanished from her face, replaced by a sudden mask of absolute terror. She lunged forward, reaching out to block the connection port on the table. "Richard, what is happening?" Chloe asked, her voice pitching upward in panic. "Zaria is not supposed to present anything to the board today. She is severely unwell. I told you all about her unfortunate breakdown at the dinner party last night. Julian needs to take her home right now before she embarrasses herself again." She looked at Julian, silently begging him to drag me out of the room. Julian stepped forward, his face dripping with nervous sweat. "Zaria," he pleaded, his voice shaking. "Please stop this. Give me the tablet and let us go home. You are confused." I ignored him completely. I smoothly sidestepped the grasping hands of my sister-in-law and jammed the connector cable directly into the main port. The massive television screen mounted on the far wall of the boardroom immediately flickered to life, displaying the encrypted login screen of my forensic auditing software. "Turn it off!" Chloe shouted, dropping her sweet, innocent act entirely. She slammed her hands down on the table, glaring at the audiovisual technician standing near the door. "Cut the power to the screen right now. She does not have the authorization to address this charity committee." The technician took a step toward the wall switch, but a loud, sharp voice echoed through the room, stopping him in his tracks. "Leave the screen exactly as it is." Everyone turned to look at Richard Sterling. The elderly billionaire was leaning forward in his leather chair, resting his chin on his steepled fingers. His sharp eyes darted between the frantic, sweating face of Chloe and my perfectly calm demeanor. Richard Sterling had not built his massive empire by being a fool. He knew exactly what fear looked like, and Chloe was currently reeking of it. "Richard, please!" Chloe begged, her voice trembling. "She is going through a terrible mental health crisis. We are just trying to protect her privacy." "If she is having a mental health crisis, then why did you tell me she was coming here to make a financial arrangement regarding our missing $300,000? Richard asked, his tone dangerously quiet. "You cannot have it both ways, Chloe. Either she is a confused woman who needs to be escorted out, or she is a financial donor who belongs in this room. Which is it?" Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked around the long table, but none of the other wealthy board members came to her rescue. They were all staring at the blank software screen on the wall, waiting to see what I had brought them. "I have sat on this charity board for 15 years. Richard continued, his voice growing harder. "I despise delays, and I absolutely loathe being managed. You have spent the last 3 weeks making excuses about why our accounts are not ready for the independent audit. Now this young woman says she brought the truth. I want to hear it." He turned his cold gray eyes toward me. He gestured toward the screen with one hand. "You have the floor, young lady," he commanded. "Tell me exactly what happened to our money." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I replied, keeping my voice steady and professional. I tapped the screen of my tablet, typing in my biometric passcode. "I am a licensed forensic auditor. Over the past 48 hours, I conducted an independent investigation into the recent cash flow discrepancies of this organization. What you are about to see will explain exactly why your funds are missing and why the treasurer of your board is currently shaking with absolute fear." I pressed the enter button on my tablet. The massive screen on the wall illuminated brightly, throwing a harsh white light across the terrified face of my husband. The presentation was officially loaded and ready to destroy their lies. The first slide appeared on the massive screen behind me. It was not a complicated financial spreadsheet filled with confusing jargon. It was a simple, highly magnified photograph of a cleared check. The amount written on the check was exactly $50,000, and it was made payable to a corporate entity called Luminous Holdings. I stepped to the side so every single member of the board could see the image clearly. "This is one of 12 identical checks written over the past 6 months," I explained, projecting my voice to reach the back of the room. "As you can see, this money was drawn directly from the primary operational account of this charity. The memo line claims these payments were for venue rentals and community outreach consulting. But Luminous Holdings does not own any venues, and they certainly do not provide any legitimate consulting services." I tapped the screen on my tablet, advancing to the next slide. A highly detailed flowchart appeared, mapping out the exact movement of the stolen money. "Luminous Holdings is a ghost company registered in Delaware just 3 months before the first check was written," I continued. "It has no employees, no physical office space, and no actual business operations. It exists for one singular purpose, which is to wash the stolen funds out of this charity and funnel them into private offshore accounts." Richard Sterling leaned closer to the table, his eyes narrowing as he read the names on the flowchart. "Who exactly owns this shell company?" he asked, his voice tight with growing anger. I looked directly at Chloe, who was gripping the edge of the oak table so hard her knuckles were completely white. "The registered agent and the primary signatory on the account is my own husband, Julian," I answered plainly to him. A collective gasp rippled through the boardroom. Several members turned to glare at Julian, who looked like he was about to pass out. The color completely drained from his face, and he shook his head frantically, raising his hands in defense. "I did not steal anything," Julian stammered, his voice cracking in absolute panic. "Chloe told me it was a tax write-off. She told me we were just temporarily holding the assets for the foundation. I never touched a single cent of that money." "For once in his life, my husband was actually telling the truth," I said, tapping my tablet again. Julian was nothing more than a naive money mule. He signed the banking documents because he was desperate for validation. He took all the legal risk while she reaped all the financial rewards. Because the money did not stay in the account of my husband, it was immediately wired out within 24 hours of every single deposit. The screen shifted to display a series of international wire transfer receipts. As you can see here, the funds were wired directly to a high-stakes casino in Las Vegas to settle a massive outstanding marker, I explained smoothly. The next transfer went to a luxury resort in Macau to cover a similar gambling debt. Other transfers were routed to private boutique jewelers and exclusive luxury car dealerships. None of this money was used to build a community center. It was used to fund the lavish lifestyle of a woman who was desperately trying to hide the fact that her generational wealth had completely dried up years ago. The room erupted into furious whispers. Richard Sterling slammed his fist down on the table, demanding order. The heavy thud silenced the room instantly. "Are you telling me," Richard demanded, pointing a trembling finger at Chloe, "that our trusted treasurer has been embezzling our funds to pay off her personal gambling debts?" "That is exactly what I am telling you, Mr. Sterling," I replied. "The $300,000 you are missing is gone. It was gambled away and spent on luxury goods." Chloe jumped out of her chair, her face a mask of pure desperation. "She is lying, Richard," she screamed, pointing wildly at me. "She completely fabricated these fake documents. She is just a bitter, jealous woman from the South Side trying to destroy my family because she knows she will never belong with us. Look at her. She is a complete fraud. Do not listen to a single word she says." I did not raise my voice or react to her pathetic racist insults. I simply smiled, a cold, clinical smile. "I am a licensed forensic auditor, Chloe," I said calmly. "Falsifying federal banking records would cost me my professional license and my freedom, but we do not have to rely solely on my digital traces, because the most damning piece of evidence is not the wire transfers, it is the signatures on the original checks." I tapped my tablet once again, bringing up a split-screen presentation. On the left side was the verified legal signature of Richard Sterling taken directly from the public charity charter. On the right side was the signature from the $50,000 check. I ran these documents through the advanced handwriting analysis software used by federal investigators. I explained, pointing to the red markers highlighting the discrepancies. "The pen pressure and the structural loops do not match. Richard, you did not sign these checks. Your signature was traced by the woman who just poured your morning coffee." Chloe completely snapped. The country club facade shattered into a million pieces. She lunged forward, her face twisted in an ugly mask of pure hatred. "You lying ghetto fraud!" she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the mahogany walls. "How dare you come into my charity and accuse me of this? You fabricated every piece of this evidence. You hacked into our systems and planted this garbage because you have always been insanely jealous of me." She turned frantically toward the board members, waving her hands. "Look at her," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Look at where she comes from. She is a nobody from the South Side of Chicago. My family built this community. You all know me. You know my father. Are you really going to let this street trash frame me for a serious federal crime?" The room remained completely dead silent. Not a single board member moved to comfort her. Richard Sterling looked at her with an expression of profound, absolute disgust. He had known her family for decades, but his loyalty was to his money and his reputation, not her temper tantrum. I did not raise my voice or react to her classist insults. When a cornered animal lashes out, you do not fight back. You close the cage. You claim I fabricated the banking documents, Chloe. I said, my voice projecting clearly, over her frantic panting. Let us see if I also fabricated this. I clicked the button on my tablet one more time. The screen shifted from the forged checks to a high-definition video file. The footage started playing instantly. It was recorded directly from the smart home security camera installed inside the private home office of Chloe. Julian was sloppy digitally, but Chloe was equally arrogant about her own home security network. They had a cloud-based recording system that captured every movement in that room, and I had legally subpoenaed the cloud data through my investigative firm when I first uncovered the initial wire fraud. The video showed Chloe and Julian sitting at her large glass desk. The audio was crystal clear. In the video, Chloe was holding a charity checkbook, pushing it across the desk toward my husband. "You just need to practice the loop on the letter R," she said in the recording. "Richard has a sloppy signature. Trace it over the lightbox like I showed you." Julian looked nervous, but he picked up the pen and began practicing the forgery on a piece of scrap paper. "Just hurry up," Julian, the recorded voice of Chloe, snapped. "If we do not move this 50,000 today, the casino is going to put a lien on my house." The real Chloe let out a horrifying high-pitched shriek as she watched herself committing a federal crime on the massive screen. "Turn it off!" she wailed, lunging at the audiovisual cart. Julian caught her by the waist, pulling her back before she could rip the wires out. He was shaking violently, his eyes wide with terror as he watched his face on the screen. "To eliminate any remaining doubts," I said, tapping the screen one final time. "I have overlaid the network login data on the right side of the video. Every time a transfer was initiated to the Luminous Holdings account, it was executed from a specific Internet Protocol address." I highlighted the digital numbers glowing in bright red. "This address is registered directly to your private mansion, Chloe. The geolocation pings exactly to your physical address. It does not ping to a hacker. It pings straight to your living room." The panic in the boardroom reached its boiling point. The elite members of the charity committee were no longer whispering. They were actively pulling out their cell phones. I could hear the panicked muttering as they realized their reputations were tied to a massive embezzlement scandal. One real estate tycoon stood up and immediately walked out of the room, likely calling his defense attorney. Richard Sterling remained seated, his face practically carved from stone. He stared at the frozen video frame of Chloe, handing the checkbook to Julian. The undeniable truth hung heavily in the air, suffocating the guilty. The undeniable truth hung heavily in the air, suffocating the guilty. Julian was the first to break the heavy silence. He let go of his sister-in-law and stumbled backward, putting physical distance between himself and Chloe. His face was slick with sweat and his breathing was erratic. He looked frantically around the room at the angry faces of the elite board members before locking his desperate eyes directly on Richard Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, you have to believe me," Julian pleaded, holding his hands up. "I had absolutely no idea she was forging your signature. I swear on my life, I thought we were just moving funds to a secondary holding account for tax purposes. Chloe told me it was a legal financial maneuver to help the charity avoid penalties. I am just a sales director. I do not understand corporate accounting. She manipulated me into signing those documents because she knew I trusted her." Chloe whipped her head around her face, twisting in absolute disbelief and rage. "You coward!" she hissed, stepping toward him. "You pathetic little coward! Do not dare try to pin this on me. You knew exactly what we were doing. You gladly signed those documents because I promised to get you a promotion. You wanted the country club lifestyle so badly that you were willing to do anything. You were begging me to let you be a part of the deal." "I did not know it was illegal," Julian shouted back, his voice cracking in sheer panic. "You told me your family lawyers approved the entire financial structure. I would never have agreed to this if I knew you were stealing the money to pay off your massive gambling debts in Macau. You ruined my life, Chloe." They were turning on each other exactly like cornered rats. There was no loyalty left between them, only a desperate scramble to avoid the crushing weight of federal prison. I stood quietly near the projector screen, watching my husband beg for mercy from the people he had spent years trying to impress. He was perfectly willing to let his own wife lose her business and her home to protect his fake image. But the second his own freedom was threatened, he threw his sister-in-law right under the bus without a second thought. "Julian!" I said, my voice cutting cleanly through their pathetic shouting match. "Did you really think I would come all this way without anticipating your favorite defense strategy? You always play the innocent victim when you get caught. But feigning ignorance is not going to save you today." I turned back to the digital tablet. I tapped the screen and closed the video file of the forged checks. I opened a new file labeled Cafe Audio. Yesterday afternoon, when Julian and Chloe tried to extort my house from me at the patio of the Buckhead Cafe, I had my cell phone recording the entire conversation from inside my suit jacket pocket. I pressed play and cranked the volume on the tablet to the maximum level. The clear audio of my husband filled the tense boardroom. "Let us make this quick, Zaria," his recorded voice echoed. "Chloe has a charity board meeting to prepare for, and we just need your signature to finalize the temporary collateral." Then the voice of Chloe chimed in, dripping with arrogance, as she threatened to bury my accounting firm in endless litigation. The most damning part was the end of the recording. The audio captured my husband confirming his full active participation in the extortion. "Sign the contract, Zaria," the recorded voice of Julian demanded. "Do not be stupid. You cannot win against her family. They have too much money and too much power." I paused the recording and looked directly at Julian. "You did not sound like a manipulated victim yesterday afternoon," I pointed out calmly. "You sounded like a man who was fully aware of the crime and completely willing to help cover it up by extorting your own wife. You actively participated in a conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and then you tried to blackmail a licensed forensic auditor to hide the digital evidence." Color drained from his face. His knees buckled, and he gripped a leather chair to keep from collapsing. The board members did not need to hear another word. The room descended into absolute chaos. The wealthy elite no longer cared about social etiquette. They cared only about their legal exposure. Richard Sterling began dialing his corporate legal team. Around the table, a dozen other board members followed suit. Frantic, hushed conversations filled the room as they scrambled to contact their private defense attorneys. The Grand Executive Suite officially transformed from a prestigious charity meeting into the epicenter of a massive crime scene. The panicked, wealthy board members were desperately whispering into their cell phones, trying to secure legal representation. I stood at the front of the room watching the absolute destruction of the high society facade. But I was not completely finished. I reached out and tapped my tablet screen one more time. The audio recording faded away, and a bright red banking alert flashed across the massive projector screen. It was time to finally explain the true trap I had set for them. I cleared my throat loudly, cutting through the chaotic murmuring. The room slowly quieted down as the board members turned their attention back to me. They were terrified of what I might reveal next. 2 nights ago at the anniversary dinner, I said, looking directly at Julian, your beloved sales director attempted to generously donate $300,000 to this charity. He reached into my purse and pulled out a heavy black credit card, expecting to drain my personal business accounts to cover the crimes of his sister-in-law. But the card was declined. The machine stated the account was frozen for suspected fraud. Julian stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He still did not fully understand what had happened. "You thought you were so incredibly clever, Julian," I told him, walking slowly around the large oak table. "You thought you sneaked into my dressing room and planted a card to steal my money. But as I mentioned before, I am a professional forensic auditor. I notice everything. I knew exactly what you were trying to do the moment you walked into my room. So before we left for the dinner, I simply opened my purse and swapped the card. The card you proudly pulled out in front of 50 wealthy guests did not belong to my accounting firm." I pointed to the bright red alert on the screen. "It was the corporate card for Luminous Holdings," I explained. "I found it hidden inside your home office desk weeks ago. I knew you and Chloe were using that account to launder the stolen charity funds. But I also knew that if I simply reported the account to the police, Chloe would use her powerful family connections to quietly sweep it under the rug. I needed to ensure that the federal authorities were forced to open an immediate and undeniable criminal investigation." Chloe let out a low, agonizing moan and sank down into her leather chair, burying her face in her hands. When you handed that luminous holdings card to the country club manager, I continued, you were attempting to process a $300,000 charge on a newly formed corporate account. What you did not know is that 48 hours before the dinner, I used my federal auditing credentials to officially flag Luminous Holdings in the Internal Revenue Service database. I placed a highly sensitive tracking monitor on the account, identifying it as a primary vehicle for suspected wire fraud and federal tax evasion. The board members stared at me in absolute stunned silence. They were listening to a masterclass in financial destruction. By attempting to charge such a massive sum in a single transaction, Julian intentionally triggered the automatic federal audit alert. I said, my voice ringing with total authority. The moment the country club manager swiped that black metal card through the payment terminal, it sent a direct emergency notification straight to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. The system instantly froze the account and automatically generated a massive federal fraud report. Richard Sterling placed his cell phone face down on the table. You set the entire thing up, he stated quietly. You knew they would try to pay us back with our own stolen money. I nodded, looking at the elderly billionaire. I knew they were desperate, Mr. Sterling, I replied. I simply provided the digital rope and allowed them to tie their own noose. I walked back to the front of the room and stood next to my black leather briefcase. You did not just embarrass yourself at a dinner party, Julian, I told my trembling husband. You handed the federal government the exact location, the exact time, and the exact digital signature they needed to launch a full-scale criminal investigation into your shell company. Julian looked like he was going to pass out. His entire body shook as the reality of his profound stupidity finally crushed him. He had willingly walked right into my trap and pulled the trigger on himself. You destroyed my life, Chloe whispered, her voice hoarse and hollow. You destroyed your own life, Chloe, I corrected her coldly. You chose to steal. You chose to target me because you thought my background made me an easy victim. You are about to learn just how little your privilege matters to the federal government. I turned away from the sobbing mess that was my sister-in-law and focused my attention entirely back on the man I had married. Julian was leaning heavily against the polished oak table. He looked as though all the blood had been drained from his body. His expensive tailored suit suddenly looked far too large for his shrinking frame. He was gasping for air, unable to process the sheer magnitude of the disaster he had eagerly walked into. I reached down into my black leather briefcase one final time. I pulled out the thick manila envelope Julian had given to me the day before. It was the exact same envelope he had slid across the patio table at the cafe. The one he arrogantly believed contained the legal transfer of my hard-earned home into the criminal hands of his sister-in-law. I walked slowly across the room until I was standing directly in front of him. I held the envelope out, extending it toward his trembling chest. Take it, Julian, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying clearly across the silent boardroom. This is the paperwork you were so desperate for me to sign today. I believe you need to see exactly what I brought for you. He hesitated, staring at the brown envelope as if it were a venomous snake. His hands were shaking so violently, he could barely lift them. But the commanding tone in my voice left him no choice. He slowly reached out and took the envelope from my hands. He fumbled with the metal clasp, his fingers slipping twice, before he finally managed to pull the thick stack of legal documents out into the open. He stared at the first page. His eyes darted back and forth across the bold black text. I watched his jaw drop open as the remaining color vanished completely from his face. Those are not property transfer deeds, Julian Y. explained, watching his world completely collapse. Those are divorce papers. They were filed with the county court system early this morning, and attached directly beneath them is an emergency financial restraining order signed by a judge just 2 hours ago. Julian looked up at me, his eyes welling with terrified tears. Zarya, please, he whispered, his voice breaking. You cannot do this. We can fix this. I am your husband. You were my husband. I corrected him, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. But right now you are a federal liability. Yesterday morning you went to my bank and falsely claimed I was mentally unstable to freeze my business accounts. You thought you were so powerful. But your little stunt gave me the exact legal precedent I needed. I took your sworn statement and the undeniable evidence of your massive wire fraud straight to a family court judge. I proved that my husband was actively engaged in a federal criminal conspiracy and was attempting to illegally extort my personal property to cover his tracks. I stepped closer, forcing him to look me in the eye. The judge was absolutely appalled, Julian. He granted the emergency restraining order immediately to protect my wealth from being seized by the government due to your pending criminal charges. As of this exact moment, you are legally locked out of every single bank account, property, and physical asset attached to my name. You have zero access to my checking accounts, my savings, my investment portfolios, or my business revenue. Julian stumbled backward, shaking his head in total denial. But the house, he stammered weakly. My clothes, my car. The house belongs entirely to me, I stated flatly. The locks were changed by a professional security team the moment I left the driveway this morning. Your designer clothes and your expensive golf clubs are currently sitting in 3 black garbage bags on the front porch. As for your luxury car, the lease is in your name, but the payments were always drafted from my account. I canceled that automatic payment an hour ago. You are officially homeless and completely broke, Julian. You have absolutely nothing left. He dropped the legal papers onto the floor. They scattered across the expensive carpet like dead leaves. He reached out, grabbing my forearms in a desperate, pathetic panic. Zarya, I am begging you, he cried openly, sobbing in front of the elite social circle he had sacrificed everything to impress. I will go to jail. I have no money for a lawyer. You have to help me. I am so sorry. I will do anything. I looked down at his grasping hands and felt a profound sense of disgust. I easily pulled my arms out of his weak grip. You canceled the health insurance for my dying mother, I reminded him, my voice cold as ice. You crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. I am not going to help you, Julian. I am going to stand right here and watch you lose everything. The room was perfectly still. Everyone was waiting for the final blow to fall. The wealthy men and women Julian had worshipped for years were now looking at him like he was a diseased rat. He had nothing left to offer them and no wife left to fund his miserable existence. The complete and total isolation he had tried to force upon me was now his permanent reality. He sank to his knees on the expensive carpet, clutching the divorce papers in his trembling hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Before anyone in the room could process the absolute ruin of my husband, the heavy mahogany doors of the executive suite swung open with a loud, forceful crash. 5 men and women dressed in dark, tactical windbreakers marched into the boardroom. Printed across the back of their jackets in bold yellow letters was the acronym IRSCID, representing the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. The atmosphere shifted from a high society scandal to an active federal crime scene. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Harrison, stepped forward and held up a gold federal badge. "Nobody move," he commanded, his voice carrying the heavy weight of absolute authority. "We are executing a federal arrest warrant for Chloe and Julian for conspiracy, wire fraud, tax evasion, and corporate embezzlement." Richard Sterling remained seated, but he gestured toward the far end of the table where Chloe was standing, frozen in shock. The other board members scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the walls of the room to get as far away from the suspects as possible. Nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire of a federal raid. Agent Harrison walked directly toward Chloe, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. Because the stolen funds exceeded $100,000 and crossed state lines into Nevada and Macau, he explained calmly, "This is no longer a local matter. You have crossed into federal jurisdiction." The sight of the metal handcuffs finally snapped Chloe out of her paralyzed state. Her deep-rooted arrogance and overwhelming white privilege flared up in a desperate final attempt to save herself. She stepped back, holding her hands up as if she could command the agents to leave her presence. "Do not you dare touch me!" Chloe shouted, her voice shrill and echoing off the walls. "Do you have any idea who I am? My father built this city. We play golf with the district judges. I know the mayor personally. If you put those handcuffs on me, I will have your badge before the end of the day. I will ruin your entire career." This is all a massive misunderstanding fabricated by a bitter, jealous woman. She pointed a trembling finger at me, expecting the federal agents to suddenly realize they were making a terrible mistake. She honestly believed that name-dropping local politicians and throwing a wealthy tantrum would somehow override a federal indictment. She thought her country club status made her completely immune to the law. Agent Harrison did not even blink. He did not look intimidated or impressed by her threats. He simply reached out, grabbed her wrist, and twisted her arm behind her back with practiced efficiency. "Your father cannot help you with a federal warrant, Chloe," he stated flatly. "The district judges you play golf with have zero jurisdiction over the Internal Revenue Service." Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream as the cold steel cuffs locked tightly around her wrists with a sharp metallic click. It was the sound of her perfect elite life officially ending. She began to thrash and kick, behaving exactly like a spoiled child throwing a violent tantrum in a grocery store. She screamed for Richard Sterling to help her. She begged the other board members to call her father, but nobody moved a single muscle. The wealthy elite watched in absolute silence as the queen of their social circle was physically restrained and humiliated in front of everyone. While Chloe fought the agents, two other officers walked over to Julian. My husband was still kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the scattered divorce papers. He did not put up a fight. He did not scream or threaten to call lawyers. When the agents pulled him up by his shoulders, his body was completely limp. He held his wrists out willingly, letting them snap the handcuffs into place. His spirit was entirely broken. He looked over his shoulder at me one last time, his face pale and completely hollow. I stood perfectly still next to the projection screen, my hands resting at my sides. I did not smile or gloat. I simply watched him face the absolute devastation of the choices he had made. He had thrown away a loyal wife, a beautiful home, and a secure future, all because he wanted to sit at a table with people who never truly respected him. Now, he was going to federal prison for them. Agent Harrison read them their Miranda rights, his calm voice cutting through the hysterical sobbing of my sister-in-law. The officers grabbed them by the arms and marched them toward the heavy mahogany doors. The grand executive suite felt completely different now, stripped of its fake elegance and exposed to the harsh reality of justice. Just as the federal agents were preparing to lead them toward the exit, the heavy mahogany doors of the suite swung violently inward for a second time. Cora, my mother-in-law, burst into the room, panting heavily and looking completely frantic. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and her expensive designer coat was buttoned unevenly. Julian must have sent her a desperate text message when the board meeting first started to go wrong. She had rushed straight to the country club, expecting to save her precious son from a minor social embarrassment. She was completely unprepared for the devastating scene unfolding directly in front of her. Cora stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes widening in absolute horror. She saw Chloe, the golden daughter-in-law she worshipped, standing with her arms pinned roughly behind her back by thick steel handcuffs. She saw Julian, her perfect golden boy, kneeling near the door, sobbing uncontrollably, with his own wrists securely locked in heavy iron. The elite board members of the charity committee were staring at her family with naked disgust and judgment. The perfect high society reputation Cora had spent her entire life trying to buy into was dead and rotting on the expensive carpet. Cora let out a loud, strangled gasp and ran toward Julian. She fell to her knees beside him on the floor, grabbing his tear-stained face with her shaking hands. "Julian, what is happening?" she cried, her voice thick with panic and confusion. "Why are these men doing this to you? Tell them to let you go." Julian could not even look his mother in the eye. He just shook his head and continued to cry, a completely broken shell of the arrogant man he was just yesterday. Cora looked up at Agent Harrison, demanding that he release her son immediately. She claimed it was all a terrible mistake and that Chloe came from a very important affluent family who would not tolerate this kind of disrespect. Agent Harrison looked down at Cora with zero sympathy. "Mom, step away from the suspects right now," he ordered firmly. "They are under federal arrest for conspiracy and wire fraud. If you continue to interfere with an active federal investigation, I will have you arrested and charged with obstruction of justice." Cora scrambled backward, terrified by the very real threat of federal prison. She looked wildly around the room, searching for anyone to fix the nightmare destroying her world. Her eyes darted past the angry board members and finally landed on me, standing calmly near the projection screen. She scrambled to her feet and ran directly over to me, grabbing my tailored suit jacket with her trembling hands. "Zarya," she begged, her face completely stained with running makeup and tears. "Zarya, please, you have to tell them to stop this right now. Tell these men that Julian was just confused and made a silly mistake. Tell them Chloe was just borrowing the money and that you are going to pay it all back today. You have the money, Zarya. You are so wealthy and successful. You can easily fix this right now. Please save my family. Do not let them take my son away to a horrible prison." I looked down at the frantic, pathetic woman clinging desperately to my clothes. This was the exact same woman who had called me just 2 nights ago, screaming at me for not blindly paying a massive fraudulent bill. This was the woman who told me I was jealous of the pedigree of Chloe, and that I severely lacked grace and class. She had demanded that I liquidate my hard-earned stock portfolio to fund the lavish lifestyle of a criminal simply because she preferred her white daughter-in-law over me. She had threatened to cut me out of the family completely if I did not submit to their toxic demands. She had never once treated me like a daughter, but now she was begging me to be her savior. I slowly reached down and pried her clutching fingers off my jacket one by one. I smoothed the wrinkled fabric of my suit, stepping back to put a clear physical distance between us. "Cora," I said, my voice perfectly level and cold. "Do you remember what you told me on the phone the other night? You told me I was just a jealous girl fighting for scraps on the South Side. You said I did not know how to behave in polite society, and that I should be grateful Chloe even allowed me to sit at her table." Cora shook her head desperately, pleading with her eyes. "I am so sorry," she choked out, sobbing heavily. "I did not mean any of it, Zarya. I was just upset. Please help us." I looked at her with absolute empty indifference, feeling no pity for the woman who had helped orchestrate my abuse. "You were right about one thing, Cora," I replied, my voice loud enough for Julian and Chloe to hear clearly before they were taken away. "I am just a girl from the South Side, and girls from my neighborhood know better than to interfere with federal law. I suggest you step aside and let the agents do their job." Cora collapsed onto a nearby leather chair, wailing loudly as the federal agents firmly grabbed Julian and Chloe, marching them out of the grand executive suite. The heavy wooden doors closed behind them, sealing their fate forever. The massive room was finally quiet, save for the pathetic sobbing of a mother who realized her family was entirely destroyed by their own toxic greed. I did not stay to watch the charity board members attempt to salvage their shattered reputations. I picked my black briefcase up from the table and walked out of the grand executive suite. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind me, leaving the pathetic wails of Cora muffled and distant. As I walked down the carpeted hallway of the country club, I felt an overwhelming sense of lightness. The toxic weight I had carried for 4 years was completely gone. I handed my ticket to the valet and waited quietly in the warm afternoon sun. When my car pulled up, I tipped the driver, slid into the seat, and drove away from the Oak Creek Country Club for the very last time. Miles away, inside a sterile concrete holding cell at the federal building, the reality of the situation was finally crushing my husband. Julian was stripped of his expensive accessories. His designer watch, his silk tie, and his leather belt were all confiscated at the booking desk. He sat shivering on a rigid metal bench, wearing a wrinkled suit that suddenly looked incredibly cheap. For his entire adult life, Julian had relied on my bank accounts to fund his desperate illusion of success. He drove a luxury car I paid for. He lived in $1 million home I purchased. He entertained his wealthy brother and sister-in-law using credit cards secured by my forensic accounting firm. Now sitting in federal custody, he was faced with the terrifying truth that he possessed absolutely nothing of his own. When the federal agents offered him his one permitted phone call, Julian frantically dialed the number for his mother. Cora answered the phone in hysterics, but she had no real help to offer. She lived on a fixed retirement income and could not even begin to afford the massive retainer required by a prestigious federal defense attorney. Julian begged her to call his older brother to ask for a massive cash loan, but his brother was currently dealing with his own legal nightmare and wanted absolutely nothing to do with the foolish man who helped ruin his wife. Julian slowly hung up the receiver and curled into a tight ball on the cold cell floor. He was sobbing uncontrollably as he finally realized he was completely isolated and financially destitute. In a separate interrogation room down the hall, Chloe was discovering that her generational wealth had a strict limit. She had spent the first hour screaming at the federal agents demanding that they contact her father. She confidently promised them that her family lawyers would have her out on bail before dinner and that the agents would all be fired for their insolence. Agent Harrison calmly slid a telephone across the metal table and invited her to make the call. Chloe dialed the private number of her father with a smug, triumphant smile on her face. The smile vanished the second her father answered the phone. He did not sound worried or protective. He sounded furiously cold. The charity board president, Richard Sterling, had already called him to explain the massive embezzlement scandal. Her father informed Chloe that the family name was currently being dragged through the mud and that their corporate shareholders were threatening to pull their massive investments due to the bad press. He told her in no uncertain terms that she was entirely on her own. The family was publicly cutting all ties with her to protect their remaining assets. They would not pay for her defense attorney, and they would not post her federal bail. He hung up the phone, leaving Chloe staring at the dial tone in absolute stunned silence. The protective shield of her elite privilege had officially shattered, leaving her completely defenseless against the federal government. The social fallout was instantaneous and utterly brutal. Within 24 hours, the Oak Creek Country Club held an emergency meeting and permanently revoked the memberships of both Chloe and Julian. The charity board released a public statement condemning the fraudulent actions of their former treasurer and legally severing all ties with her foundation. The elite women who had flooded my phone with condescending text messages and fake concern just a day earlier suddenly scrubbed their social media accounts, deleting any photographic evidence that they had ever been friends with Chloe. The carefully constructed high society empire that my husband and his sister-in-law had sacrificed their morals to build evaporated into thin air overnight. They had traded their freedom for a fake reputation, and in the end, they lost both. As for me, I was already moving forward. I spent the evening sitting by my mother in the dialysis clinic completely at peace, knowing I had finally cut out the cancer that was destroying my life. The weeks that followed the dramatic arrests were the most productive and peaceful weeks of my entire adult life. I did not waste a single moment feeling sorry for the man who had tried to destroy me. I directed all of my energy into finalizing the legal separation. Because Julian was facing severe federal indictments, my divorce attorney was able to heavily expedite the proceedings. When the official hearing date arrived, I walked into the courtroom wearing a sharp black suit, feeling completely empowered. Julian walked in looking like a completely different person. He was out on a heavily restricted federal bond, awaiting his criminal trial. The arrogant sales director who loved tailored suits was entirely gone. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting shirt, and his shoulders slumped forward in total defeat. He did not even have the courage to look me in the eye. The family court judge presiding over our case was a stern woman who had already reviewed the massive file of evidence I provided. She had absolutely zero patience for a man who attempted to extort his own wife to cover up a federal wire fraud conspiracy. The hearing was shockingly brief. Julian did not even bother hiring a private divorce attorney because he simply could not afford one. He represented himself, offering nothing but pathetic apologies and quiet agreements to every single demand my lawyer presented. He knew he had zero leverage. The judge delivered her ruling with swift and absolute brutality. She stated on the official court record that Julian had committed egregious financial abuse and reckless endangerment of marital assets. Because he was facing massive federal restitution and potential fines, the judge ruled to sever our finances entirely to protect me from his criminal liabilities. She awarded me 100% of our shared assets. I retained sole ownership of the $1 million house, the luxury vehicles, my business, and all of my investment portfolios. Julian was stripped of everything. He was ordered to assume complete sole responsibility for any debts incurred by his fraudulent activities. He walked out of that courtroom with nothing but the cheap clothes on his back and a massive mountain of legal debt. Without my bank accounts to support him, the reality of his new life hit Julian with crushing force. He could no longer afford the lifestyle he had sacrificed his marriage to maintain. He was forced to move into a tiny rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. It was a bleak, depressing room that smelled like stale smoke and desperation. A far cry from the gated community and pristine country club he was used to. Because his name was now publicly associated with a massive federal embezzlement scandal, no reputable company in Atlanta would even consider hiring him. His lucrative career in corporate sales was permanently over. To pay for his cheap motel room and the mounting fees for his bottom-tier defense attorney, Julian had to take the only job he could find. My former husband, who used to mock my humble beginnings on the South Side, was now working the overnight shift at a local 24-hour gas station. He spent his nights mopping sticky floors, stocking shelves, and standing behind a bulletproof glass window, ringing up cheap snacks for minimum wage. Customers who used to attend his lavish dinner parties now drove past his gas station without even glancing in his direction. He had become completely invisible to the elite society he worshipped. Mutual acquaintances would occasionally text me updates about his miserable condition, hoping to fish for gossip. They told me he looked exhausted and terrified of his impending federal trial. I never responded to their messages. I felt absolutely no guilt regarding his current living situation. Julian had built his own prison long before the federal agents ever put handcuffs on him. He had chosen to value the toxic approval of his sister-in-law over the loyalty of his own wife. He gambled his entire life on the assumption that I would be too weak to fight back. He lost that gamble, and now he was paying the ultimate price. While Julian was scrubbing floors, my life was expanding in ways I had never imagined. My forensic accounting firm gained massive credibility after the scandal. Wealthy clients realized I was an auditor who could not be intimidated or bought. My business revenue tripled. I was thriving not just financially, but emotionally. The house felt incredibly peaceful without his constant toxic presence. I had successfully protected my mother, my business, and my peace of mind. 6 months after the explosive board meeting, the federal trial of my former sister-in-law finally reached its inevitable conclusion. Chloe did not get the luxury of a quiet plea deal or a gentle slap on the wrist. Because her family had completely cut her off, she was forced to rely on a public defender who was massively overworked and completely outmatched by the federal prosecutors. The trial was a highly publicized media circus in Atlanta. Every single detail of her lavish spending and gambling addiction was broadcast on the evening news for the entire city to see. She sat in the courtroom looking pale and gaunt, stripped of her expensive pearls and designer dresses. When the federal judge handed down her sentence, there was no mercy. Chloe was sentenced to 8 years in a federal correctional facility without the possibility of early parole. She broke down sobbing as the bailiffs led her away, but this time there was no one left in the gallery to comfort her. A few weeks after Chloe was officially transferred to federal prison, I received an unexpected phone call from Richard Sterling. The billionaire board president asked if I would be willing to meet him at the Oak Creek Country Club one final time. He wanted me to personally oversee the final transfer of the recovered funds back into the community center account and sign the official audit release forms. I agreed to the meeting, but I made it very clear that it would be my final interaction with his organization. I drove up to the familiar wrought iron gates of the country club on a bright Tuesday afternoon. The valet rushed forward to open my door, treating me with a level of frantic respect that I had never experienced when I was married to Julian. I walked through the grand lobby, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I was no longer the quiet, obedient wife from the South Side, desperately trying to blend in. I was the woman who had single-handedly dismantled a federal fraud ring and brought the elite social circle to its knees. Before I could even reach the executive suite, I was intercepted in the main dining room by a group of familiar women. It was Beatrice and the same country club wives who had gleefully commented on the malicious Facebook post of Chloe just months earlier. They rushed over to me wearing bright fake smiles and dripping in expensive jewelry. They surrounded me like a flock of desperate birds, chirping loudly about how amazing I looked and how much they had missed seeing me at their weekly tennis matches. "Zaria, darling," Beatrice cooed, reaching out to touch my arm. "We are all just so incredibly proud of you. We always knew there was something terribly wrong with Chloe. She was always so unstable and toxic. We are planning a lavish summer gala next month, and we would absolutely love it if you would be our guest of honor. You are exactly the kind of strong, successful woman this club needs." I looked at Beatrice and the eager faces of the women standing behind her. They were the exact same people who had mocked my background and celebrated my supposed mental breakdown. They did not respect me. They were simply terrified of me. They recognized that I held more real power and wealth than they ever would, and they wanted to attach themselves to my success, to elevate their own pathetic social standing. I slowly stepped back, pulling my arm away from the grasping hand of Beatrice. I looked at her with an expression of absolute calm indifference. "Thank you for the invitation, Beatrice," I said, my voice perfectly level and loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "But I have absolutely zero interest in attending your gala or playing tennis with any of you. I do not need a membership to this club to validate my worth, and I certainly do not need the approval of women who turn on their friends the second the wind changes direction." The fake smiles vanished from their faces instantly. They stood frozen in stunned silence as I turned my back on them and walked away. I did not feel angry or bitter. I just felt completely free. I walked into the executive suite, signed the final audit papers for Richard Sterling, and walked right back out the front doors. As I drove away from the pristine golf course, I realized that the greatest victory was not sending Chloe to prison or leaving Julian bankrupt. The greatest victory was discovering that my value was never tied to their toxic world. I had built my own empire from the ground up, and I was finally ready to enjoy it entirely on my own terms. The first morning I woke up in my massive house completely alone was the most beautiful morning of my life. There was no Julian complaining about the coffee. There were no frantic text messages from his mother demanding my attention. The heavy, suffocating energy that had plagued my home for 4 years was completely gone, replaced by brilliant sunlight and absolute quiet. I walked through the empty hallways, running my hands along the walls of the property I had fought so hard to protect. Julian and Chloe had tried to convince me that I was nothing without their prestigious family name. They wanted me to believe that my success was somehow tied to their validation. But standing in the center of my beautiful living room, I finally understood the truth. I was the foundation. I was the one holding everything together. And without them dragging me down, I was finally free to soar higher than ever before. I spent the first few weeks completely redesigning the interior of the house. I threw away all the expensive, gaudy furniture Julian had purchased to impress his shallow friends. I replaced the cold, modern art with warm, vibrant paintings created by local artists from my own neighborhood. I transformed his dark, oppressive home office into a beautiful, sunlit sanctuary filled with green plants and comfortable reading chairs. Every single change I made was a deliberate physical rejection of the fake life he had tried to force upon me. My home was finally a genuine reflection of my own spirit. It was a place where I could breathe freely and think clearly without any toxic interference. My primary focus immediately shifted back to the people who actually mattered. I upgraded the premium health insurance plan for my elderly mother, ensuring she had access to the absolute best medical care in the entire country. Her kidney treatments continued without a single interruption, and the stress of the previous months melted away from her face. I hired a private at-home nurse to assist her on the days she felt weak, and I spent every weekend cooking her favorite meals in my quiet kitchen. Watching her smile and laugh again was worth more to me than any country club membership or high society dinner party. Julian had tried to use her delicate health as a cruel weapon against me, but his cowardly tactic only reinforced my fierce determination to protect the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise me on the South Side. Professionally, my life skyrocketed to a level I had only dreamed of. The high-profile charity scandal made front-page news across the state, and the financial community quickly learned the name of the forensic auditor who single-handedly took down the corrupt board treasurer. My phone never stopped ringing. Wealthy clients and massive corporate entities wanted to hire the woman who possessed absolute integrity and fearless precision. I had to hire 5 new junior accountants just to manage the sudden influx of lucrative contracts. We moved our operations into a stunning modern office building downtown, overlooking the exact same city skyline I had conquered. Chloe had maliciously promised to bury my accounting firm in endless litigation and destroy my professional reputation. Instead, her profound arrogance served as the greatest marketing campaign I could have ever asked for. I was no longer just an accountant hiding in the background. I was a highly respected and trusted authority figure in the financial district, standing proudly as a self-made success story. Now sometimes I look back on that terrible anniversary dinner and marvel at how quickly an entire empire of lies can completely collapse. Julian and Chloe spent their entire lives obsessing over optics. They bought clothes they could not afford and joined clubs they did not belong to just to convince strangers they were important. They were so terrified of looking poor that they willingly became federal criminals. They thought their white privilege and their fake old money aesthetic made them completely untouchable. They vastly underestimated the quiet determination of a black woman who knew the actual value of a dollar. I truly never had to raise my voice or throw a public tantrum to defeat them. I simply let their own massive egos guide them directly into the federal trap I had carefully prepared. They thought because I was quiet, I was weak. But a forensic accountant does not argue, we just collect the receipts. Have you ever let someone dig their own grave before you handed them the shovel? Please tell me your story in the comments. If you loved this sweet revenge, hit subscribe, like this video, and never let anyone make you feel small in your own house. I will see you next time. Thank you for watching. The story of Zaria serves as a remarkable masterclass in emotional regulation and strategic thinking. The most profound lesson we can extract from her journey is that true power does not reside in loud, explosive reactions, but in quiet, meticulous preparation. When confronted with blatant disrespect, financial abuse, and deeply rooted classism, the natural human instinct is to scream, defend oneself, and fight back in the heat of the moment. Julian and Chloe expected Zaria to unravel entirely. They desperately wanted a public tantrum to justify their toxic narrative and paint her as the unstable villain. Instead, Zaria chose the path of the forensic auditor. She stayed completely silent and let the undeniable facts do the heavy lifting. She understood that arguing with people who are actively committed to misunderstanding you is a futile waste of precious energy. By retreating into silence, she gave her abusers the illusion of control, allowing their own unchecked arrogance and greed to blind them to the trap they were eagerly walking into. Her remarkable restraint was her greatest weapon. She meticulously gathered evidence, removed her emotions from the equation, and executed her defense with absolute surgical precision. This narrative serves as a powerful reminder that we do not have to attend every single argument we are invited to. When toxic individuals try to tear down your worth, you do not need to prove your value through exhausting shouting matches or desperate pleas for validation. Your background, your hard work, and your unshakable integrity are the only foundation you need. Let your abusers exhaust themselves with their own lies while you quietly build your fortress and collect the receipts. Take a moment today to assess the battles you are currently fighting and choose to respond with strategic silence rather than wasted anger.